Hey Ola, hey everyone. We're happy to host the second part of our conversation. For those who haven't checked the first one yet, please do. This is some extra information and it would be worth to know what happened in our conversation before. For those of you who don't know us yet, especially Ola is our senior solutions and strategy consultant working for our consulting team. And she's got a deep expertise in AI and blockchain.
It's a pleasure to be here, as always.
You have just organized an event in Finland, in Helsinki. That was an executive dinner, and it was mainly about AI adoption at the bigger scale. So let's start with that topic, and let me know, why have you decided to host such an event in the first place?
So, starting from the very beginning, the idea behind the dinner came from our strategy session in early November. So, as I joined Espeo, the idea was to revamp the relationship between our legacy clients in Finland, because, as you know, the origin of Espeo is from Finland. So, I was brainstorming the ideas how to explain to our customers that we are much more than just a software house, and we can offer to them the consulting services. We can be their sparring partner when it comes to brainstorming. And with the New Year's approaching, it was November, so 2026 was just around the corner. And from our enterprise clients, we've heard a lot about their strategies for AI for 2026, and that majority of enterprises were actually thinking about just connecting a corporate card to Claude and just maxing it out and treating this as an AI strategy. We also realized that there is this almost like disconnection between what's happening at the ground levels when we can see more and more developers using AI on a daily basis. When at the same time, the top level executives, they're well aware of AI, but they don't really know how to approach it. Like the ChatGPT is not actually an AI strategy. So I came up with this idea of hosting executive dinner, which is going to allow us to gather our key clients from Finland, including some new friends, which we made over the last couple of months, inviting a CTO from Polpharma, which is a leading Polish, I would even say, AI adoption company when it comes to organizational AI. So not only everyone is using ChatGPT, but actually really putting thought into how the organization should work with the AI as a central piece. And
so it's like
decided to do it.
Animated and structured at Polpharma, how they work with AI, how they actually process different ideas around the organization, how they gather ideas, how they actually move these into some POCs and then production stage systems developments and so on, right?
So it was very interesting from this angle that we're not really talking about how to use AI, but more about how to organize the organization around the AI. So all kinds of projects or initiatives around the AI will actually see the light of the day and would not be just a project in someone's little room just trying to tinker with it by themselves.
And for this group of executives in Helsinki during that executive dinner, both sides, how would you describe what's like the most overhyped thing they are seeing? Like they think, hey, we should actually have this, and in your opinion, like it doesn't make sense. And on the other side, what's actually like underrated, what they should be looking into when it comes to AI?
The key issue, which appeared multiple times during our conversation, was the communication aspect and the human communication aspect. So it's neither what people are not doing and what people are doing, but the element which was repeated over and over and over again was how difficult it is to convince people to either use AI or trust it, or how the communication between people was already difficult, but now it's becoming even more challenging with agentic workflows being applied everywhere. And I believe that was the most interesting element of the dinner, or maybe the most surprising one, that at the end of the day, the adoption of AI on the enterprise level is, we thought that we're going to get to the point that, okay, this is adoption of AI in the enterprise is not about ChatGPT for everyone, but there is a particular strategy for the implementation. And here is the checklist that we advise you to follow. But actually, we got to the point that before we prepare a checklist, we actually need to communicate with humans, because as the speed and efficiency increases, the gaps in the communication are becoming wider and larger because everything speeds up. So I believe that was the most interesting take.
So in the end, it's pretty much like a huge transformational project, implementing that sort of complex AI strategy, policies, and so on. And like, what's your take on the role that should actually be in charge here? Like, who is usually in charge, and what do you think? Is that a good choice or a bad choice? Should that be like the CIO, CEO? Should that be the dedicated role for that sort of AI adoption across organizations?
It's a very good question. And I would be tempted to say that almost like AI champions in every division. And then let's define the division, like because every organization got a different structure. But I would say there should be an AI champion for HR, or there should be a AI champion for operations. Why? Because AI allows us to automate the already existing processes. And this is what AI is greatest at in this very moment. Just speed things up, make them more efficient. But in order to increase efficiency of a process, we need someone who understands the process in the first place. And also not someone who repeats the process every single day, but someone who's got the understanding of why the process is in place why the process is in place in the first place. And then what are the dependencies of the process. So really understanding the entire ecosystem of this particular part of the organization, and then understanding all the discrepancies, we can apply automation in the most efficient way, and apply the pattern recognition and makes it just, beautiful.
Yeah.
But
it actually makes me think about when I was working at the Commerzbank like 10 years ago, and there was this excellence or smart automation teams later. And it was basically an RPA technology, like applied over the banking processes and so on. And it was like a huge investment. There were like full teams in the top. I think there were like 40 or 50 smart automation developers. That's how they were called. And so there was that sort of commitment from the organization point of view that they actually invested a lot in understanding these processes, analyzing and doing like end-to-end process and the whole transformational system out of this. And I feel like currently the companies like kind of this market split into, and like one companies are more into like, let's risk it all and like go full AI. And there's pretty much no one in the middle. And they're like, no, we don't know what's happening with data and so on. Let's stay out of this. So do you also see that sort of trend? Like, what would you say to leaders that are a bit afraid of AI?
The sooner we think thoroughly about how to adopt AI, the better for us, because it's here and it's here to stay. I mean, we can see what's happening with 11 Labs right now. Like they closed the 11 billion valuation, and they've got the partnership with Revolut, with T-Mobile in Germany. Like, is becoming huge, right? So, and they're moving fully towards the agentic direction. So it is the future. And we can see how, the costs are being reduced. So it's the quality of the voice AI is becoming almost unrecognizable compared to humans. So this transformation is already here. It's happening. And now is the question, are you going to jump into it now? Or are you going to try to jump into it in the 12 months where I don't want to say it's going to be too late, but it's going to be just much more difficult.
But what about the companies, organizations working in regulated markets? Because they are actually afraid of that, right? So again, what's happening with the data privacy, data processing, and so on? That's basically the biggest concern, right? So maybe they can turn up to private models, or but there are limitations to that. It's difficult to learn these and to teach these and to develop these models. And so what about these? Like being afraid of regulations?
I'm not an expert. I've been following this stage very closely for the last 3 years, but by far I'm not an expert. But from what I'm seeing is what you just mentioned, like deploying the private models. It's not that difficult anymore. It's really not that difficult. Yes, it might be difficult if someone wants to do it on their laptops, but it's becoming so much easier and it's becoming available to everyone. So I kind of don't buy into this narrative, because for me, this narrative is like, oh, what about regulation? It's more of a narrative coming from fear that I don't know how to do it, so I'm going to cover myself with something like regulation because it's broad enough that everyone's going, oh, regulation, oh, okay, you're right. When in reality, if you want to do it, there's so many options. There's such a humongous potential that all you need to do is just try. And those the amount of wrappers and what Claude and Anthropic are offering for the companies, the data security levels that Anthropic is addressing over and over and over again. For me, it's more of a narrative. I don't know how to do it, I'm afraid, so I'm just going to cover myself with regulation.
Got it. So it's more about having brave enough leaders to actually be on top of that change.
Yes, and also the leaders who are brave enough to say, look, I don't know neither because it's new to everyone, so let's try it together. But I deeply believe that the changes that we are seeing right now, especially in the technology world, are requiring new types of leaders. The leaders who are leading by example, who are not in their ivory tower and just saying, oh, do this because I want it, but really people who are in trenches, figuring those things out together, because that's the beauty of AI. We don't need to follow the same pattern. Every single person has a full personalization, different approach to communication, choosing different channels. It's all achievable today. But the first step is the hardest one, and it needs to be done by the leadership who addresses that. Because then we hear situations of, oh, they allowed us to use Google, the Gemini Pro, because we've got it in the workspace and people are using it for private usage from the company's account. Like, it's happening. So now we can either pretend that we are blind and we cover ourselves like, oh, no, we're going to see what's going to happen. Or we can actually be brave enough to say, I know it's here. I know it's not going to change. Let me learn. Let me jump into it and see where it's going to take us. This is a journey, and that's the most beautiful thing. And I feel like we have a little bit of this vibe during the executive dinner that the future belongs to those who are curious. And we are asking questions, and we're talking about what are the biggest breakthroughs in technology. We're talking about quantum computing during the executive dinner. Like, really just we've got those amazing minds and those amazing human beings gathered on one table, just exploring ideas, because this is, at least for me, what's all it's about. This is what's going to set us for the future. Be courageous.
I also think that, the beauty of AI is you can work on the specific POC, something very small that actually improve the quality of the specific process. But then it's really easy to put it at scale, to use it in different departments, to use the similar form of optimization or automation and actually apply it to several different processes. So something that's really small can very easily be done at scale.
And the beauty of it is this POC, something which would take you weeks or months. Now it's just in a second. It's a funny example because next week, so on the 12th of February, I've got this honor of speaking during the Poznan Startup Community event, when I'm going to be talking about the self-regulation as the most important mode of a founder. Mm-hmm. And as a part of a surprise for all the attendees, I'm preparing like a little protocol, the mental hygiene protocol, something which I was working on in my previous startups. And, then I was thinking about building an app and putting it together, and it took me a year to develop it. And then 2 days ago, I just put the well-written prompt into Lovable, and I got exactly what I wanted in 5 seconds. And just a link, and they've got it, a 7-day protocol, which, they can check the sources, they can validate it. Everything is in there. And I did it with one prompt in Lovable. Done. And, 3 years ago, I dedicated a year of work in order to make it happen. So that's the beauty of it. And even here, I've got 2 approaches. I can even like, oh my God, my job's gonna be done, because, how is it possible that I was working for a year for something that now takes seconds?
Robots taking over the world.
Exactly. But then this is one mindset, and the other mindset is like, okay, this is great. Let me learn and let me be courageous. Let me explore. But it requires a little bit of humbleness, I believe.
Ola, you have also traveled somewhere else lately. You've been around pretty much. And so you traveled to the Middle East, right? You've been in Saudi Arabia and Qatar.
It is only Saudi Arabia.
Oh, sorry. Yes. That was it, Saudi Arabia. And what was the reason? Sorry, I'm just because you're everywhere all the time. And our other colleague was in Qatar. Yes. But in Saudi Arabia, you actually attended several events. What was the reason behind it? Can you tell us a bit about this trip and high level, firstly, about logistics, where you've been, what you've seen?
It was a very interesting transition. I'm not going to lie. So as you guys know from our previous episode and this conversation, we've been planning the executive dinner in Helsinki for a while. But then the day before the dinner, I was asked if I can attend the Saudi conference on real estate as a blockchain specialist, because Saudi government was announcing the tokenization of the real estate market, and they wanted some experts during the conference to be present. So I said, yeah, sure, why not? So directly from Helsinki, I flew to Saudi Arabia. Why not?
Change.
Quite a change. Though a very fun fact was that when I landed in Saudi, it was very cold. I was in my mind, I was like, I took all my summer dresses. I was like, yes, this is so great. Exactly. And then I'm getting at the airport, and I'm actually putting my winter jacket on because it's like 6 degrees and, it's a desert. So it was really cold, and everyone's like, it is like the coldest week. And I was like, oh, great. That's amazing.
It was pretty similar to Finland, I think then. Yeah.
I mean, plus minus 10 degrees, but yes, it was, that was the first surprise. And I've been to Dubai a couple of times in the past, but that was my very first time in Saudi.
That was Riyadh, right?
Yes, exactly. I've heard about Riyadh in Saudi Arabia from a dear friend of mine who actually lives there. And his dad's been building a company there for the last 40 years. So he understands, he's Lebanese, and he had the chance to observe the changes in Saudi for a while now. So I've heard about it, but it was a very interesting experience to be there and experience it in person. So the first thing is, you can almost feel the speed of development, and the people are hungry. They are, and at the same time, they are hungry, but there is so much possibilities that you can literally feel it. So this is from one hand, and from the other hand, being tall, blonde, especially in hills, one head higher than everyone in the room, but that was also an interesting experience. So it's definitely, I felt like the contrast is from one hand, there's this richness of culture and the petrodollars, and at the same time there is the forward thinking of the king and the changes that are happening. But at the same time, and I had this beautiful opportunity to one of the dinners talk to AI professor, a female, who was actually named top 100 most influential females in the region. And we had this deep conversation about the societal changes. How, from one hand, there's the vision and there's the future, and one of the conferences which I attended, which I'm going to talk about more in a second, was the real estate forum. And the future cities, Hillary Clinton was speaking there. So it's like the great people, the prince, was like everyone, and you can feel how important it is, and you can touch the grandiose vision that they are trying to bring to life. But at the same time, there are those people who were Bedouins just 3 decades ago, right? So two generations ago. And the mindset change doesn't follow that quickly. So it's very interesting to observe.
Okay. And regarding this real estate forum and the tokenization program, can you tell us a bit what's that about?
So what's that about? It's about tokenization of real estate, and no one knows anything else. But
so it's very initial.
It was literally announced on publicly, and I think it was mentioned for the first time somewhere January, and then it was publicly announced a week ago. So the idea is that, I believe is very forward thinking, which is we're gonna do tokenization of all the real estate. We're gonna put it on the blockchain, which we know is gonna make life so much easier to everyone, because the change of ownership is going to become that much easier, and everything is going to be much more transparent. And with the pace of development that is happening there, I cannot imagine if they would have to manually register all the real estate that they're building, and also having this mindset shift in mind. It's really like jumping from a camel to a Bentley. It's a humongous gap, and so having it all digitally would definitely benefit everyone. We are in conversation with the accelerator, who is an accelerator program for real estate startups. We're exploring the idea of blockchain for real estate, so Espeo might be advising them how to do it. Because again, it's a little bit like with the blockchain space in general, I would say. People don't really understand it. People heard about crypto, but then this is not crypto. This is something completely different. And tokens, what kind of tokens? Tokens, I mean, the apes? I mean, no, that's something completely different. So there is definitely a lot of questions. And I know that there are, I think, 4 companies that are now, have access to the sandbox, which was created by the Ministry of I believe, infrastructure, but don't quote me on this one. So they can play with the tokenization platform, but it's very, very early stage. But it was very interesting to have those discussions. It's almost like, AI is mystical, but people are at least experiencing at some level. They can talk to ChatGPT, but here's like, tokenization of the real estate. It's like, no idea. It's like pure magic.
Yeah, actually, blockchain makes a lot of sense at the big scale, right? So that's why, like, at individual level, it was hard for people to actually play around it and get to know it better. But also, I think that sort of approach, as an example of like real life use case, it would probably make fractional ownership much easier for the real estate, which is again a driver in adoption and like a big help for the smaller investors who can actually invest in, partially in the real estate, right?
Yes, especially that again, it was within weeks, days, Saudi also opened to the external investors. Mm-hmm. So that's definitely going to open the investor market in Saudi. Because I know I've been repeating myself, but it's one huge building ground. It's just, it's humongous. And it's just, it expands into the desert. And it's... And
how do you see the role of public institutions in Saudi supporting such growth?
I mean, there's no other way, because there's no legacy enterprises. Even when at some point we went to the financial districts, and yes, there are American companies in Saudi, but what I've heard from our partners, in most cases, they're just empty because people want to have Saudi presence, but the country that is moving from full government regulation to privatization, there's a lot of startups, because again, everyone is hungry, everyone is building, and then everything is state regulated. So I'm really keen to see how it's going to develop.
So you also see some challenges, issues that the country might be facing on the way? Like, how would you name the biggest challenges that they actually need to overcome to hit the targets?
Very interesting. So I actually asked exactly the same question to this wonderful professor with whom I had the chance to talk about, because we were comparing the society, what's happening in the Western culture, what's happening there. And she said the biggest health issue that they are struggling nowadays is obesity, because they don't walk, they just take cars, and the petrol is so cheap that they just drive everywhere. There's no pathways; they just drive everywhere. So obesity is being a huge problem, and this mismatch of how to very quickly educate a ruler society, when at the same time, and I've heard stories from the friends of mine whose dad's been working there for years, horrendous stories of how, just horrendous stories of how, how they say that if you give someone a lot of money, it's just going to amplify what they already have inside of them.
Got it.
And it's just, you can see straight away who is coming there because they actually bring something to the table. But 80% of people are just there because, money is here, so let's try to make some money. So it's a little bit like a wild, wild west with the futuristic hologram. It's
Okay. And like, in your opinion, talking to executives, leaders, professors in Saudi, like, what's the biggest belief in terms of technology? Like, do they think AI will change the way they operate? Is it blockchain? Is it the general like digitization around the country, or like what's the biggest thing around?
I would say digitalization in general. I also had a chance to visit the garage, which is the accelerator hub in Riyadh. When Antlers got their offices, Plug and Plays got their offices, and multiple state-supported incubator and accelerator. A beautiful space, really just amazing. And now majority of them are focusing on AI because everyone is focusing on it. As Espeo, we are working on opening some kind of collaboration to educate the future cohort about the blockchain, which they're really open to, because we've got the Saudis present, so that's possible. But in general, digitalization. And then again, it's almost a bit funny, like when you say that, oh, you are from the tech world and you've got Saudis presence, the door just open, but it's again, and it's my very subjective opinion, but people don't really understand what those technologies can bring, but they've had the buzzwords. And they're following the idea of, yes, the Vision 2030, and this is where we're heading. And at the same time, people who are at the very top, they perfectly understand what it means. It's like, it's a really well executed plan and everything makes perfect sense. But then for average human being, I believe that it can be almost like too hard to grasp.
And to wrap up the conversation, I was also thinking about presenting how big Saudi Arabia is developing and growing by actually asking you about the events that were there just during the week. Have been visiting, because actually I think you were there for several events, which like were actually extremely different, right?
Yeah, I mean it was crazy because I think I attended 5 events in total. I'm tempted to say it's quality over quantity, or in this case, quantity over quality. There's a lot of going on. There's a lot of going on. And it's great because everyone's got an opportunity to do something. But the quality of it's quantity over quality.
Okay, so that's sort of like initial phase of hyper growth, right? And they still need to figure out what to focus on, what's the most important thing.
And at the same time, there is the strategy, because it's 2030. So the strategy is in place. But the strategy allows everyone to do something. So everyone it's almost like everyone wants to jump into the same train. And when everyone is jumping, it requires a lot of skills to understand what really is a potential here. Because when everyone is jumping in the train, everyone is talking a lot, but then it's a matter of realizing, okay, what is that we're actually going to do? Because as we know, you've got a limited span of attention, it's your energy, you've got the 100% of it, and it's not possible to do 5 million projects at once. So we need to start picking. But because there is so much possibility, people are like, oh, and this event, and that, and it's, it's almost like it's hard to commit. Yeah. If you see what I mean.
So let's make focus a word 2026.
Exactly.
Ola, thank you so much for another interesting conversation.
It's a pleasure.
Everyone listening or watching us, thank you so much. And we hope to see you in the next episode. Cheers.
Thank you, guys.